Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. Before you blame planning, inspect the material trap. There is a moment in a high mix plant where the schedule looks stronger than the operation actually is. The board is posted. The next jobs are sequenced. Supervisors know the line assignment. Operators know what is expected. The job packets are ready. Materials still show inventory on hand. The supplier has not officially failed. Customer service is still telling itself the critical order can ship. From a distance, the plan does not look broken. It looks tight but workable. That is why the material trap is dangerous. It does not always begin with an empty rack, a stopped line, or somebody yelling that the plant is out of parts. Sometimes it begins while the floor is still moving. It begins when the material read changes, but the build sequence stays fixed. It begins when the plant keeps following the posted route because nothing has failed hard enough to force a different decision yet. And when that trap finally closes, planning usually takes the first hit. In my background, the first casualty in every combat operation is always the plan, and it is no different here. Planning should have known. Planning should have moved the schedule. Planning should have warned production. Planning should have protected the customer critical order. Maybe some of that is true. Planning accountability matters. Materials accountability matters. Supplier performance matters. Production discipline matters. But before you blame planning, inspect the material trap. Because the schedule is not the objective. The schedule is the route. The objective is controlled production, protected material, finished work, reliable customer communication, and a build sequence that does not consume the wrong option before the plant realizes what it lost. The tool behind this briefing is strategic evasion. It sits inside Deepen, which is decision execution and problem navigation. Deepen is about moving through the problem once the situation is clear enough to choose the next path. Strategic evasion is the move you use when you can see a trap forming before it owns the operation. The shortage is not fully active. The line has not fully stopped. The critical order is not late yet. The wrong job has not consumed the material buffer yet. The plant still has room to steer. Strategic evasion is not avoidance through fear. It is not refusing to produce. It is controlled route selection. The leader sees the trap, protects the objective, changes the route, assigns ownership, and sets the trigger for when the read must be checked again. And the route changes. The objective does not. That is the discipline. I have made versions of this mistake before in other operating environments. A plan gets built, and the plan is reasonable when it is built. People commit to it. Resources line up behind it. Then one dependency starts to weaken. Not fail completely, just weaken. And because it has not officially broken, the team keeps walking the same path. Experience teaches you that a lot of damage happens in that space between visible warning and official failure. If the leader waits for official failure, the route may already be owned by the trap. That is not an argument against planning. Good planning matters. A stable schedule matters. The floor needs direction. Supervisors need clarity. Operators need a plan they can execute. But the plan only stays useful while it continues to protect the objective. Once the forward read changes, route loyalty can turn into exposure. You can picture Marisol, the materials manager at a high-mix industrial parts plant. The plant runs several product families across shared production lines. Some jobs use common components. Some require customer-specific hardware. Some use the same material family in different quantities. This is not a simple one product line where every material decision affects only one job. This plant lives inside overlap, shared materials, shared labor, shared equipment, shared changeover pressure, shared customer commitments. A customer critical order is scheduled for Thursday afternoon. That order depends on a supplier shipment due Thursday morning. The supplier has not canceled. Nobody has said the shipment is dead, but the update is soft. The shipment left late. The carrier status is not clean. The materials team has enough inventory to support some work, but not the full posted sequence if the inbound shipment slips. That is the difference that matters. Not no material, not enough material certainty. That uncertainty is uncomfortable because it does not give the leader a clean villain. If the supplier had already failed, the room would know what to react to. If the rack were empty, production would know the line cannot run the critical order. If the customer had already called, escalation would be obvious. But this is earlier than that. This is the gray zone where the plant has to decide whether it believes the forward read enough to adjust the route before failure becomes undeniable. The schedule shows 3 jobs before the customer critical order. 2 of those jobs use the same material family as the critical order. One is a standard replenishment job. One is a lower risk customer order with more delivery flexibility. The third is compatible work that can run without consuming the constrained material. Production wants to follow the posted schedule because the crew is staged for it. The line supervisor says the team is ready. The scheduler says changing the sequence creates communication friction and may affect changeover planning. Customer service says the critical order cannot slip. The plant manager wants a clean answer before the next shift handoff. Every pressure in that room is legitimate. Production wants movement, planning wants stability, materials want supplier confidence, customer service wants a reliable commitment, supervisors want clear direction, operators want work that can start and finish, nobody wants to resequence too early, nobody wants to create confusion, nobody wants to look unstable because a supplier update might still recover. So the first instinct makes sense. Stay the course, run the posted sequence, start the planned jobs. Trust that the shipment arrives before the critical order releases. Keep production moving until there is proof that the supplier will not make it. That sounds practical. It sounds disciplined. It sounds like a leader refusing to overreact. But it may be the exact route that carries the plant into the trap. Here's the material trap in plain language. The plant has enough material to run some work, but that does not mean the material is free to use. Some of that material may need to be protected for the customer critical order. If the plant runs the lower risk jobs first and consumes the shared material family, the line may stay busy for the next few hours while the highest risk order gets exposed later. That is why this trap can hide in motion. The board shows progress. People are working. The line is not idle. Labor is being used. Jobs are starting. Supervisors feel like they are protecting output, but the plant may be consuming the option it needed most. The schedule looks alive, but the objective is getting weaker. The phrase available material can mislead people. Available material is not always free material. If that material protects a higher risk customer commitment, it may be physically available and operationally protected at the same time. The rack may show material on hand. The system may show quantity. Production may be able to pull it. But if using it now exposes the customer critical build later, that material is not open stock. It is a buffer. The visible problem is supplier uncertainty. The deeper failure point is material allocation inside the build sequence. The plant does not only get trapped because the supplier shipment is late, it gets trapped because the current sequence uses the wrong material before the shortage becomes active. So the better question is not, can we keep the schedule moving? The better question is, if we keep this sequence unchanged, what will the material constraint do to the customer critical order? That question changes the room. It stops the argument from being only about whether the schedule can run. It moves the read toward what the schedule is protecting, what it is consuming, and what exposure it creates if the supplier slips. Marisol has to inspect the route, not defend the board. Job 1 can run, Job 2 can run, the team is staffed, the setup plan exists, there is material for some production. All of that may be true, but truth is not always protection. The question is whether running those jobs in that order preserves or consumes the option the plant needs later. The current path looks clean on paper. Job 1 runs. Job 2 follows. Job 3 runs after changeover. The supplier shipment arrives Thursday morning. The customer critical order releases Thursday afternoon. The line builds it. The order ships. That is the intended path. The trap path is different. Job 1 consumes part of the shared material family. Job 2 consumes more of the protected buffer. The supplier shipment slips. The customer critical order reaches release without enough material. Now the plant has a lower risk job built, a critical order exposed, possibly work in process that cannot finish cleanly, and a schedule that has to be repaired under pressure. Materials has to expedite. Production has to change direction. Customer service has to explain risk with less confidence. Planning has to rebuild a day that could have been steered earlier. That is the cost of staying loyal to the route after the forward read changes. The plant did not fail because people were lazy. It did not fail because nobody wanted the order to ship. It failed because work was allowed to continue on a route that was quietly consuming the wrong option. Strategic evasion gives Marisol permission to name the trap before it fully activates, not permission to panic, not permission to stop production without discipline, permission to say the current route is now creating exposure and the objective needs a cleaner path. This is where leadership has to be precise. If Marisol only says, "I'm worried about the supplier, the room may push back," worry is not enough. If she says we cannot run anything until the supplier arrives, that may be too blunt. The plant still has work. But if she says the forward read shows that job 1 and job 2 could consume the material buffer needed for the customer critical order if the supplier slips, now the trap is specific. The decision has shape. The pressure against this move is real. The scheduler does not want to change the sequence because every change creates work. A schedule touches labor, fixtures, setup timing, material movement, quality coverage, packaging, and shipping priority. The line supervisor does not want a late change because the team is already staged. Customer service does not want uncertainty because the customer commitment is important. Materials does not want to sound alarmist if the supplier still recovers. The plant manager does not want a vague risk conversation. They need a decision. That is why strategic evasion has to stay tied to the objective. If evasion becomes vague, people will hear hesitation. If the alternative route is unclear, the team will lose confidence. If the leader cannot name the trap, the consequence, and the protected objective, the move will feel like fear dressed up as planning. The clean move is to separate the jobs by material risk and customer consequence. Which work is customer critical? Which work is lower risk? Which work can start and finish without the constrained material? Which work could strand if the shipment slips? Which jobs consume the shared material family? Which jobs preserve the buffer? Which order has the least flexibility? Which changeover can be avoided? Which supplier confirmation will trigger the next reassessment? This is not the full paid process. It is the recognition level read. It shows how the leader thinks before the route changes. Marisol is not avoiding production. She is protecting production from a predictable material trap. The plant may still run, but it may run differently. A compatible job can move forward because it does not consume the constrained material. A lower risk material dependent job can wait. Material can be reserved for the customer critical order. The supplier trigger can be defined before the next build slot releases. The route changes. The objective does not. That line is the difference between disciplined evasion and avoidance. Avoidance tries to escape the discomfort of the decision. Strategic evasion accepts the responsibility of the decision and chooses a cleaner path. Avoidance says, let us not deal with this. Strategic evasion says, we are going to deal with it before it owns us. Teams can smell the difference. If a leader changes the schedule without naming the objective, the floor hears confusion. If a leader changes the route without explaining the material trap, production hears indecision. If a leader blames planning without showing the sequence risk, the team hears politics. But if the leader says, this material protects this customer critical order, this supplier confirmation is not strong enough, this lower risk job will consume the buffer, and this alternative route protects the build, the conversation becomes operational. Now look at what happens if Marisol does not act. The first consequence is material exposure. The plant uses available material on work that can move now, while the order that matters most becomes weaker later. The second consequence is stranded work in process. A job starts but cannot finish cleanly, or a later job reaches release without enough material to proceed. The third consequence is changeover stack. The line may need another changeover because the sequence was not adjusted while options still existed. The fourth consequence is schedule repair. Planning has to rebuild the day under pressure instead of steering early. The fifth consequence is production distrust. Supervisors lose confidence when they run what was posted and still get trapped by material. The sixth consequence is customer impact. The customer critical order may miss, not because the plant had no warning, but because the warning did not change the route. The supplier may have created the constraint, but the supplier did not decide which internal job consumed the remaining material first. The supplier did not decide whether the plant reserved the buffer. The supplier did not decide whether the schedule stayed unchanged after the read changed. The supplier may be part of the cause, but the routing's still a leadership decision. If the plant walks into the trap, everyone starts preparing a defense. Planning says the supplier changed the conditions. Materials says the shortage risk was visible. Production says they ran the posted schedule. Customer service says the critical order had no room. Supervision says nobody gave a clear change. Leadership says someone should have protected the build. Every one of those statements may hold a piece of truth. The operation still lost control. The better move is to bring that conflict forward while the route can still change. Not in a blaming way, in an operating way. What trap are we walking into? What objective are we protecting? What material is truly free to use? What order carries the least flexibility? What job should move? What job should wait? What supplier signal tells us to reassess? That is how the conversation becomes useful before it becomes expensive. It moves from personality to exposure, not who is at fault first. What exposure is forming, not who owns the embarrassment. What route protects the build, not who made the first assumption, what assumption no longer holds. This is where strategic evasion fits inside the bigger direct action system. CSA helps with the read. It helps the leader understand what is actually happening before action gets built on weak ground. In Marisol's case, CSA would help clarify supplier confidence, material on hand, shared material demand, job sequence, line capacity, changeover exposure, and customer shipment risk. Deepen uses that clearer read to move through the problem. Strategic evasion is the deepen move because the trap is visible before it becomes active. The line is not stopped. The material is not fully gone. The critical order is not late. The route can still change. If the problem had already activated, she might need a different deepen move. But in this window, strategic evasion is the clean fit. Pro can help check what the decision could damage if it is handled poorly. Customer trust, planner credibility, production confidence, cost control, overtime, schedule stability, and team alignment. ACE can help compare options before the first workable answer becomes the only answer. Should the plant resequence, reserve material, run compatible work, wait for supplier confirmation, move a lower risk job? Each option carries trade-offs. TMC matters after the decision because a route change without clear communication creates execution drift. Who owns the adjusted sequence? Who updates the line supervisor? Who talks to customer service? Who watches the supplier trigger? Pace and Brain can support the backup path if the supplier update changes again. FLS turns intent into controlled action on the floor. ALC later captures what changed so the next build cycle starts cleaner. The point is not to turn this briefing into a system catalog. The point is to show that one tool does not live alone. Strategic evasion needs a clean read before it, and it feeds cleaner risk, option, communication, execution, and learning after it. When this tool is skipped, everything downstream gets weaker, the risk picture gets muddy, the options get reactive, the communication turns defensive, execution becomes recovery, learning becomes blame. A weak read creates a weak decision. A weak decision creates unclear tasking. Unclear tasking creates execution drift. Execution drift creates rework. Rework creates lessons that either get captured or wasted. Strategic evasion is one part of that chain, and in this case, it protects the operation before recovery becomes the main job. The better read is simple but not easy. It is not, we still have material so we can keep the sequence. It is, we have material, but we may not have enough material to protect the sequence that matters most. It is not, the supplier says it is coming, so the plan can hold. It is supplier confidence is part of the route decision, not proof that the route is safe. It is not changing the schedule creates friction. It is leaving the schedule unchanged may create a bigger failure after the plant loses options. That is the shift. The leader stops asking only, can we keep running? The leader starts asking, what are we exposing if we keep running this way? That question changes the decision because the problem is not movement. The problem is movement toward a trap. A plant can be busy and still be making the wrong commitment. A line can be staffed and still be consuming the wrong material. A schedule can look organized and still be hiding exposure. This is why strategic evasion matters in manufacturing. It protects the objective before effort turns into recovery. Look at your own environment for a second. Where are you treating the posted sequence like it is sacred? Where are you trusting a supplier update that is softer than people want to admit? Where are you using material that physically exists but should be protected for higher risk work? Where are you starting jobs that can start but may not finish? Where are production and planning already preparing their defense before the failure is activated? And that last one is a signal. When departments are already building explanations before the line fails, the trap is probably visible enough to inspect. Do not turn that into blame. Turn it into a route conversation. Here is the practical takeaway. Before accepting the next material constraint as manageable, force the read into 5 plain statements. The material constraint is this. The schedule assumes this. The customer critical work at risk is this. The trap forming is this. The objective we must protect is this. Those statements are not the full strategic evasion process, but they sharpen the conversation. They move the team away from vague concern and toward a clear route decision. Once the trap is named, the conversation changes. Instead of, why are you changing the schedule? The better question becomes, what happens if we do not? Instead of, why are we holding this job? The better question becomes, what customer critical work does this material protect? Instead of, can the line run something? The better question becomes, should the line run this job now? And that is a stronger leadership conversation. And remember this, strategic evasion is only valid if the objective stays protected. If you use it to avoid ownership, it is not strategic evasion. If you use it because the decision is uncomfortable, it is not strategic evasion. If you cannot name the trap, the consequence, the objective, the alternate path, and the reassessment trigger, you may not be steering. You may just be hesitating. And the standard is clear enough to say out loud, this is the forward read. This is the trap forming. This is the objective we are protecting. This is what happens if we stay on the current route. This is how we steer around it. This is who owns the alternate path. This is when we reassess. That is the control point. Before you blame planning, inspect the material trap. Ask whether the posted sequence still protects the objective. Ask whether available material is actually free material. Ask whether the supplier update is firm enough to support the current route. Ask whether lower risk work is about to consume material needed by higher risk work. Ask whether changing the sequence now is cheaper than repairing the schedule later. The objective is not to defend the original route. The objective is to protect the customer critical build. A trap avoided early is not a problem solved later. It is a problem that never got permission to own the line. When you're ready to go deeper with this tool, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course tied to decision execution and problem navigation, and start there. Thanks for listening to the briefing.